I mean, you've brought us to about 2016, 17 when Project Maven starts off, right? So let's dig deep into that.
Mhm.
Tell us more about heading the JIC, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, and the Project Maven, which was started by the Department of Defense. Um, it seems like, and I think you've talked about it as a startup organization
Mhm.
within the institutional bureaucracy of the Pentagon. So first, describe to us, for those who might not be familiar, what Project Maven was conceptualized as, but also maybe talk about the significant challenges that you faced in integrating those state-of-the-art capabilities, computer vision, other tech into the drone technologies, and the broader sort of set of technologies that you try to integrate into the working of the armed forces.
Yeah, and there is a sequence here. So I'll start with Project Maven, and then after doing that for almost 2 years, was then asked to stand up the DoD Joint AI Center, also known as the JAIC. But to set the stage, I'll go back to Secretary of Defense, then Secretary of Defense Ash Carter in 2014, who was one of the smartest people that has ever sat in the chair in the Pentagon as the Secretary of Defense, that understood something different was happening. Well, everything I talked about a few minutes ago, he began to see and hear from a lot of people like Eric Schmidt, at the time, I think Alphabet CEO, that were informing him of this revolution taking place in commercial industry. And Ash Carter was smart enough to realize something fundamentally had to change in the department. So he signed out a memo that I think it's called the Defense Innovation Memo. And that was the genesis for standing up the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, DIU-X as it was called then, now just DIU, so much further down the road. And what the intent there was to bridge that gap, that valley of death between the Department of Defense, who was interested in all the standard legacy hardware systems, and what was happening in Silicon Valley, to actually put a forward outpost called DIU-X out there in Mountain View, California, to serve as that matchmaker between these new tech companies that had not been paying attention to the government and what the department's needs were. So that was the beginning of that. But more concrete, regardless of Secretary of Defense Ash Carter's memo, what I was involved in at the time when I was a 3-star general in the Pentagon in my final 5 years in uniform, I had a different job. This was not an AI job to begin with, but what I was doing was running a high-level steering group on intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance processing, exploitation, and dissemination, what we call PED. Just a fancy word for saying all these different sensors are providing all sorts of data that then needed to be turned into information, and then Intel analysts would then take that and turn it into high quality, actionable intelligence. The problem was we were dealing with more information from more sources, from unclassified open source all the way up to exquisite classified intelligence, than in quite literal terms than at any point before in history. And we had run out of humans to be able to deal with that workload. So we met as a group of very senior people in our regular steering group and said, what do we do about this? Everybody recognized the problem was only going to get worse. Especially, we all anticipated at some point we're going to be coming out of the Middle East and shifting our attention elsewhere on the world. But the Middle East was not going away. So could we use something else to make up for the loss of people over years? That became the basis. We had a meeting one day, and there was a Marine Corps colonel. His name is Drew Kukor. He was fairly new at the time, but he was a bulldog to say the least. And we turned to Drew, and I said, Drew, figure out how do we solve this problem. Too much information, not enough human analysts. And when they do look at it, it was really mind-numbing work. 10 hours looking at video, maybe seeing 15 minutes worth of horrendous things that they then had to react to very quickly. And so Drew and his number two, also a Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel reservist, Joe Larson, went around and looked across the Department of Defense and didn't see anything. They were hearing related to this memo Secretary of Defense Carter has signed out, hearing about these things from DIU Experimental, saying there's other technologies out there, but they couldn't find it in the Department of Defense. And what they found invariably was we have it, but it's about 6 years from being really good enough to put in the field. unacceptable for us. We wanted something within that year. Within 6 months, we wanted to feel something. It was crazy fast, but we had an idea of what that might be. So they couldn't find it in the Department of Defense. And so the two of them spent a lot of time out in Silicon Valley and very quickly, almost instantaneously, found companies, startup companies with CEOs that said, I think we have something that could help you called computer vision, artificial intelligence, but in this case, very specifically computer vision, machine learning, and deep learning, to then do just a couple of very basic things at the time. Detect objects, classify those objects, and then track those objects. This was, I would say, at best, sort of Wright brothers biplane state of the art back then. It wasn't very advanced, but for us, it was an epiphany. We had found something. So Colonel Kukor and Lieutenant Colonel Larson came back and said, okay, we've got it. We're going to put a little demonstration project together. We're going to show it to the number 2 in the department, Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work, who himself was focused. And maybe later I can get into the third offset, which was for him, This was all about the third offset strategy. We brought that technology, showed a demonstration using, maybe 10,000 images, which was not nearly enough for the other things we were doing, but enough for a demonstration project. Showed the results to Deputy Secretary of Defense Work, who said instantly, got it. That's what I finally, everybody else says they're doing AI. Nobody is doing AI in the department at speed and scale. So you're it. And he signed out a memo within about 24 hours, the famous memo, the Project Maven memo, and 8 years ago in a few months, 2017, he signed it out and we were up and running. So Drew and Joe put together a tight elite sort of team to go and figure out how to bring these commercial capabilities, computer vision, into the Department of Defense, so they had algorithms already. They were using them for commercial purposes. They had to be repurposed for DoD use, which meant we took our DoD data, which we can get into these challenges that you want to talk about. That was the number one challenge, hands down, probably is today for most people in the government to do an AI project, is the data challenge sometimes seems insurmountable, and then began to take these algorithms, turn them into functioning models, and then field them. We fielded the first models in the combat range or combat zone of the Horn of Africa within about 8 months of standing up. It was absolutely light speed for the Department of Defense. Didn't feel like it was fast enough and the products weren't good enough, but it was a start. And we demonstrated that we could actually do not only computer vision, but we also started introducing some natural language processing translation capabilities that would help people sort of that were there physically on the battlefield. And that was it. We were off to the races. It was hard. It was a minimal viable product. We took all the commercial software industry best practices and applied them to a place that was not used to doing anything resembling what we were doing. So this was about culture change as it was about anything else, probably more so about culture change than the technology itself.